Hello, welcome to session 8, which the main focus is on how, as individuals, whether we're parents, spouses, perhaps even peers, and supervisors, team leaders, department heads, managers, and a variety of other roles we might have working with other people, how can we help develop natural creative thinking in individuals? Paul Torrance and others who did research for many years into finding ways to test for measurable aspects or traits of creative thinking kept discovering that when they went beyond kindergartners to first graders, second graders, third graders, and then fourth graders, they found that the greatest number of school systems around the world had a tendency to teach it out, train it out, narrow down all the different kinds of ways we can think down to basics that didn't include creative divergent thinking. Yet, with training, with some in the classroom situations, you can help people become more divergent again and learn to accept it. I'm going to share just a simple approach that I used years ago that came to me through a variety of resources. One, studying self-help material or motivational materials. Prior to reading Stephen Covey's excellent book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I followed a similar pattern to him, except I didn't have the in-depth focus that he had on self-help and motivational material. But we seemed to both find one of the originals, and that was Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin, when he was in his mid-age, moderate success at the time, had tried a few businesses, printing, publishing, hadn't really gotten into politics yet. But he did what was popular in the 80s and I hope is still being used, because I haven't had direct contact with HR departments now in 10 to 15 years. I'm not aware whether the concept of 360 evaluations or 360 programs where you have individuals and the people that work with them and the people who supervise them all give you feedback about that same individual. Ben Franklin did something similar. According to his autobiography, he reached out to many of his customers, to his friends, to his neighbors, to people. I can't remember the name of the club, one of the clubs he belonged to. It was kind of like a Mensa club of its era. And he basically asked him, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? That's a pretty daring thing to do, unless you're ready to learn some shocking things about yourself. If everybody is honest and objective, not overly critical or subjective. What he did with it was he listed all these priorities, these weaknesses or traits that were holding him back from being more successful. And he chose the top 13, the 13 that showed up the most among all the people that he asked for feedback from. And then he put them on individual cards, maybe index cards nowadays, or you might put them into an iPad or some other device nowadays. And what he would do on a Monday morning, or perhaps a Sunday evening, and would randomly pick one of the 13. And in his day, he kept a piece of paper, or when I did it, back in the 80s, I kept index cards in my pocket. And I'd have whatever that trait is. It might be meeting deadlines. And the concept was you shuffled them up, he drew one out randomly, he would carry it around, and throughout the day, each day, from Monday to Friday, he would take it out once in a while and look at it and see if there had been examples of that day when he had done a better job at that trait, deliberately, consciously. And those are the two key words: deliberate creativity, conscious creativity. So that's what I'm recommending, is to use a little bit of a Ben Franklin approach. There are 4 backup sheets to this session that I will be attaching to the video and putting on my Facebook page. And if can't access those for some reason, write to me please at Alan@creating, CRE8ng.com. For the military spelling, that's Charlie, Ralph, Edward, 8, Nathan, George.com. By the way, I see Benjamin. Hi, Benjamin. Good to see you. It's been a while. Hopefully I'll be in Singapore in the next year. Roger Roney, your name is familiar, but I've gone blank right now. I'll check into my notes and see how we know each other, but thank you for joining me. So what I chose were 13, much like he did, 13, and created what I called a few years ago Black's Baker's Dozen of creative thinking generating tips. They were different types because if you do Google searches on creative thinking tips, you'll find hundreds, if not thousands. But I find it's most important if you choose the ones that you have conscious awareness of them being important or relevant to your job at this time in your life. One was to challenge all assumptions, to try to get out of the habit of assuming. And in so many communication classes and decision-making classes that were taught this week anywhere in the United States and perhaps in Europe and other English-based courses, the word assume is spelled out as if it's 3 different words: ass, you, and me. Whenever we make an assumption, the odds are pretty strong you're making an ass out of one of us, if not both. So the trait is to, and the habit and the way of thinking is to make a point of challenging assumptions. And in some of the processes, like Osborne Parnes process or Kettner-Trigo, there's a stage where you do that. You look for things that are assumptions, not realities or facts. Second would be possibly look for similarities in unrelated ideas, situations, or events. I make reference to the program House because I was fascinated by how they included it, even though they didn't bring it out all the time deliberately, but became conscious after a while of his tendency to do that. It's one of the reasons why he liked to use the greater brain and not just his own brain. He would listen to everybody and sometimes not listen to anyone. See familiar in new, strange ways. Well, there are 2 people, partners in the firm Synectics. One of them, Bill Gordon, who wrote 2 books, one called Seeing the Familiar Strange and Seeing the Strange as Familiar. Deliberately, he would do that. He was trying to teach, in his case, children how to look at familiar things and look at them in a strange way. Look at strange things and see the familiar in them. Looking for the key, the connections. Another one is take risks periodically. Or another phrase some people use is break the mold. Well, my recommendation, based on some of the blunders in my own life, is run a risk analysis of what might happen if you do it. Well, I haven't always done that. But enough. Take advantage of chance, ideas, situations, mistakes. When a strange idea pops up and you're not clear about it, understand it. Maybe take a chance on it. Test it. Play with it. Make a scenario out of it. Make a story out of it. Make a model out of it. Or as a term that's quite often used in various design thinking models, a prototype, a sample, a model. Interrelate ideas, situations, and events. Deliberately pick things from different parts of a situation or problem and find the relationship, or the forced relationships. Hitchhike, collect, borrow, steal, share, gather ideas from everywhere. Be constantly writing them down. One of the first things I heard any presenter on creative thinking techniques was the fact that get in the habit of always having something to write things down on. Notebooks, iPads, tablet, well, it's a tablet. Any device or just simply paper. One of my good friends in South Africa has a habit of using the inside of his arms and writing notes. I've seen other people do the same. I've seen others use the sleeve. Napkins. Many of my best architectural designs I actually did on napkins. And then there's the excellent books about the back of the napkin thinking. Ask yourself, what would other people do? As I brought up yesterday and the other days, of using, at least projecting into what would other occupations do? What would people in Italy do versus people in France do versus people in Japan? One of the best books I've read about product design and marketing was titled Brought to You from the Same Wonderful People That Brought You Pearl Harbor. It's a rather crude title, but their whole issue in that book was they were looking at the idea of how to sell products in Japan. And the trouble was too many companies from the United States were thinking like Americans. They were not thinking like Japanese. And they found one of the bakery companies came up with a wonderful bread because they discovered by their surveys that the Japanese love pastries, especially cakes. But what their early research had shown that basically the wok is the only cooking device. So the concept that they came up with was, how do we make a wonderful, sweet-tasting cake that can be made in a wok? Therefore, it can be made in any Japanese house or apartment. First sales were phenomenal. Second and third and multiple sales were disastrous on that particular time. One of the things they discovered later was that making the cake in a wok tended to leave a flavor or some aspect of that cake in the wok, so that when the wok was used to cook other meals, it carried over the flavor. It turned out not to work. Imagine yourself as a child and take their perspective. An example I read many years ago was an orthodontist who was trying to make the experience of his office. He was a pediatrician and an orthodontist, but mainly for younger children. And what he would do was on the weekends, he would go into his waiting room, into his office, and he would try to physically experience it like a child coming, especially for the first time. He'd get down on his hands and knees so he was at the height of a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old. And he would look at the office, he would experiment with it, see what it's like. It led to many changes in it. One, the child comes in with the parent. Parent's up here, child's down here. Where's the counter where the nurse and the receptionist is? Here. So this child can't see. So what he did was change and create a counter for the children. A counter for the child to sit up underneath and fill out a form. And for the young children who could not write, really, their writing skills were not there, or their reading skills were minimal, he created forms that were diagrams and charts and cute little cartoon characters. He thought through the mind of his client, his patient, not just as an adult. That leads to another one. Take different physical perspectives, high, low, close, far. Look at it from a bird's point of view. Look at it from a tree point of view. Look at it from the ground. Even one of my heroes, who was a hero of Frank Lloyd Wright's, Louis Sullivan, even he did that. He was one of the original, what people are calling design thinking people. He would go out and basically sit in the park across the street from where the bank was supposed to be located in Des Moines, or wherever else it was in the Midwest, and he would sit and watch. He'd watch the people, the patterns on the street. He'd watch the patterns of many different things before he would start designing where to put the entrance, where to put the windows, where to put this, where to put that. And last, read a chapter from a book on creative thinking and practice what it talks about. In other words, keep learning, keep learning. So, here's what I'm recommending for those of you who are supervisors, team leaders, or coaches, because in all of our managers, they're just different titles or slightly different roles, is we all can be coaches. We can all be counselors. Coaching, the way that I've taught it over the years, is basically coaching is working on skills, counseling is working on attitudes and what might be causing the attitudes. So you can serve both roles, coach and counselor. So choose a trait that your department needs. Preferably, have it as a discussion between the people in the department, not just you. And say, okay, let's come up with a list of the traits that we need to work on this quarter, using this approach, the Ben Franklin approach of 1 a week for 13 weeks. Then, randomly pick one and start. Use one per meeting. Spend a half hour to an hour a week applying one of them in your actual work. Teach them and ask them to teach someone else. One of the variety of many things I learned from working with Bob Pike and his various associates years ago, when I was attempting to be part of that group, was that the model of 3. One teaches another, one observes the process. Then they reverse the roles or change the roles. So everybody becomes a teacher, a learner, observer, and looking from different perspectives. Set up teams that try different ones of the 13. Now that's something I've done in workshops, training programs, and university courses to help people see the difference, see what can be made just in a few minutes, and always use your imagination. Now, concrete, ROI, what's the result if I do these kinds of things? I guarantee you, you will see evidence of the following. You'll see morale go up. That I've seen for many years, wherever I worked, whatever it was, a factory, an office, a store, a university classroom. When I helped people become more creative, or they felt they were encouraged to be creative, morale tended to increase. It seldom went down. I know that for a fact. Higher levels of confidence and self-esteem. You can see it in the way people walk around, how they deal with each other, how they work in meetings. Focus, like Alex kept saying in brainstorming, numbers, quality. From quantity will come quantity. From quantity will come quality. The odds are in your favor by probability. More ideas. Focus on less negative attitudes. Fewer problems seem to occur. Finer solutions and more of them. Improve teamwork. advanced productivity levels generally, lower error rates, and advanced quality levels, superior customer service. The more people are allowed to be creative and use their imagination, use ideas that are their ideas, or ideas that they helped create and develop, the greater service they will provide other people. And then, of course, the result of the rest of them, less turnover, less absenteeism, and less lateness. And the last, which a lot of people think is the most valuable thing in their lives, more and more fun. Be specific, be concrete, be out front with the idea that we're going to improve creative thinking. We're going to be accepting of it. It's the acronym I used a few sessions ago, SPREAD, which I've been using for years, to represent at least 6 categories or groupings of perhaps unlimited things we can actually do. Support it, make it consciously aware that you are truly supporting it. Promoting it, posters could be something as simple as the Tom Watson campaign for NCR over 100 years ago was the signs that say think, or think differently, or invent, like HP has used and other companies. Just create slogans that help promote it. Recognize it. Hundreds of ways that you can help recognize individuals for their creative thinking, through your internal newsletters, through posters on the walls, through a personal note, a card home, something in the local newspaper. Then reward. Develop a little reward system. Yeah, there are the arguments of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. But my observation over my lifetime of working since the age of 16, there is so little concrete, observable effort at extrinsic motivation beyond pay that a little bit here and there can help. Intrinsic, of course, people need to motivate themselves. No argument there. To reach the highest level of their capabilities, they need to be pushing or pulling themselves, so to speak. They can pull as well as push. So I'm going to say thanks again, Ben. Good to see you, Chris. Heinz, thank you. And Joe, thanks for joining me, all of you. I'm going to capture this so I remember your names. But the intent was be deliberate about making people aware that the effort is to help them be more creative. Whether it's in a classroom, in your home. I have a good friend that we used to do a lot of training together for a couple clients who had a creativity closet. It wasn't anti-TV, it was anti-certain types of TV. But in that closet, you open the door, there were costumes, there were art materials, there were crafts materials. There were a variety of other things. You might have a small library of many different things. You might take your children to the library and let them select books of their own. Or what my first wife and I did with our sons was we enrolled them in a Dr. Seuss book club. So there was a new book coming every month that we would read to them until they got to the point where they could read on their own. One issue I want to stress, though, just doing art, just doing creative activities, without consciously and deliberately focusing on, today we're going to look at curiosity. I want you to deliberately be more curious when we go out for our walk today. I want you to be curious when we go to the mall. Tell me what you see that I'm not seeing. Not just enroll children, your children, or your staff in workshops doing artwork or writing short stories. It's the the actual process, the actual trait that you're consciously, deliberately focusing on is the key from my perspective. Thank you again, and we'll see you tomorrow at the same time.